Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Feud from Wacom Emperors. Feud is a two-player head-to-head game of not really deck building, but kind of drafting and building out your units in a goal to eventually take your opponent's health down from 10 down to 0 by being as efficient as possible through the drafting, through the placing, and through the navigation of all the resources and zones in this game. This is a prototype, all rules and components subject to change, everything you see here, prototype and all that, and I'll have a link to the Kickstarter campaign down below. But with that, in Feud, you basically start off with Leader, who has 10 health. You're going to be tracking your health, you're going to be tracking your silver, you're going to be tracking your prophecy over here, your insight over here, and what you're going to be doing is you're going to be using these resources to buy more cards to put in your field to eventually be able to attack your opponent and take them down. To that end, every single round you're going to be navigating and moving your units around the field as well as drafting new units. What you're going to do is, for example, you have your leader is always between two zones. So for example, your leader could be occupying the wall and the homestead, or the wall and the battlefield, or the market and the homestead. All these different places your leader can occupy, and it's going to count as being in both zones, but regular units are going to be either or. So for example, let's pretend for right now we just start with a market and homestead as our first turn. A very reasonable first turn. We also have this knowledge card over here, this prophecy, knowledge, and unit cards. This over here is a knowledge card, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to activate both of these zones. You're going to activate them in order, taking insight, taking the market, and taking the homestead, which is how you buy new cards. And so we have one silver over here, so we're going to bump up our silver, and we have one draft over here, so we can go ahead and buy one card. With our current 2 silver, we're going to keep it simple, start off the process by grabbing a villager, so we can start by having a little bit more on our next turn. That will be our turn 1, and then next turn we'll be able to go ahead and get a bit more done because we have more units in play. From there we'll go back and forth, our opponent will take a turn, we'll focus a bit on our turns, our opponent goes ahead and drafts something, and we go ahead and we relocate a bit. Now you could relocate from spot to spot like so, or from adjacent spot to adjacent spot, but you cannot relocate 2 spots away, so I can't take my villager and move them to the battlefield. And in fact, the only places you cannot recruit a new unit is you cannot recruit into the battlefield and you cannot recruit into the graveyard. You can recruit anywhere else and then move around. And so when you move to the wall, you're basically spending a turn being defensive, and you can navigate or pivot from there, because the wall is effectively a response to your opponent's battlefield. Your battlefield is how you attack, and the rest over here, these 3 zones, are to get your engine up and running, and your graveyard is where dare units go, where they will buff up some cards, including your leader. But with that, we're currently in the homestead over here, and we're going to go ahead and keep our leader over here, so we're going to again take, and we have to spend a single gold on that card. So again, on our next turn, we will again take a single gold, but now we have 2 cards that we can pick this turn. So now we can gather 2 cards from this pool, and it's worth mentioning over here, this one also costs 1. In fact, I probably did this poorly, I'm realizing now, because, well, you'll see, but effectively, this card over here costs 1, but this card requires that we have 3 insight. Whenever you see a number like this, that means you have to have that much insight, but you're not actually spending it. Some prophecy cards and some unit cards require insight, but insight is actually only spent when you go ahead and activate a knowledge card. And to that end, we're going to go ahead and, we have 2 picks. I'm actually going to move this guy over here. I think it makes sense. I'm going to move it down to the Sacred Grove. So now we're going to get a market, again get a homestead, but we're also going to go ahead and still have 1 draft. The reason I did that is you can't actually have more than 2 of any one unit. There's 4 of each card type. You can't, well, for units there's 4 of each card type, and you can't have more than 2 of any one unit, which means there's no point buying the villager twice, because I can't. The Philagi over here requires I have to have 3 insight, which I don't, and so having 2 drafts this turn wouldn't actually help me. We're going to go ahead and again spend a single card over here. I guess you could argue, we could take other cards as well, and there is that option, so you want to possibly go ahead and take some knowledge cards or some prophecy cards. But over here, we're going to take this card over here, and we're going to dump them into the market. Maybe we'll dump them into Sacred Grove. Let's ramp up that Sacred Grove and see what we can do with it. So again, it goes back to our opponent, back to us, and we can go ahead and take our next turn, where we are getting 2 Sacred Grove knowledge over here, bumping that up over here. That'll give us a lot of flexibility as far as this goes. We get 1 market, bumping back to 3 again, and then we can go ahead and try to figure out exactly what we want to buy, because we could buy a Berserker. We can't buy another villager, we already have that. We could buy a Philagi if we wanted to. You know what, let's go ahead and buy a Longbowman has range. That's helpful, because we can go ahead and have a little bit more flexibility in terms of dealing with their opponents. We have Afterlife, deal 1 damage to a target unit. That could be useful as well, but I think we'll keep it simple and go with the Philagi over here. It has 2 health, it has no attack, and it's no defense as well. Defense you'll see on some cards. So for example, the Shield Wall over here has 1 defense, but we haven't heavily talked about how combat works yet. Right now we're just focusing on building things up, and right now we're going to go ahead and take that Philagi, lowering our silver by 1. Next turn, we're going to go ahead and continue moving things around. So we're going to go ahead and put the Philagi. This time, we'll go ahead and actually, maybe we'll go ahead I don't have any military might. I need to focus on that. You know what? Maybe we'll go ahead and put this guy here and grab a berserker instead. So we're going to go down to 0, and we'll have the berserker in play, and we'll put it into the wall. So now our opponent sees us in the wall. They know that we're probably heading towards the attack, because the berserker, when they kill a unit, you deal 1 damage to your opponent's leader. And remember, the ultimate goal is taking your opponent's leader down from 10 down to 0 health. So on our turn over here, we're going to go ahead and try to figure out how to respond on our next turn. We're going to bump this guy to the battlefield, bump this guy to the market so we can start getting some resources back, and maybe we'll bump this guy back to the market as well, and bump you down to over here. So we're prepping for a lot. We're not really prepping for a buy this turn. We have nothing going on in the homestead. But we're going to get 3 coins and one insight, which is helpful to have. And so we're going to go ahead on our turn. We'll bump up the insight. We'll bump up our coins by 3, and we'll deal with an attack. Now, attacks are handled very differently depending on whether your opponent has things in the wall area or not. Generally, right about now, they probably would, but I'm just kind of trying to show you how it goes, so I'm not really heavily focused on that. But effectively, if your opponent responds with a person by having them assigned to your defender, by being in the wall, by having, well, they could do it in any of these zones over here, but the wall is going to be +1 defense over there. Let's say they go ahead and they have this character over here, and they have that, and they go ahead and respond. You know what? Actually, let's put a shield wall in play. Let's pretend we had a shield wall in play that has 4 health and 1 defense. If it's in the wall zone, it's going to have an additional defense over here, so it's going to be 2 defense over here, plus 4 health, which is going to negate this 1 attack, leading only 1 damage on that shield wall, assuming that he assigns it as a blocker to your character. So in general, in combats, if they assign a blocker to your fighter, then they'll have a bit more flexibility over how things play out. But if they do not assign a blocker, if they don't have them in the right zones, then instead your character gets to assign their attack damage to whoever you want, allowing you to choose the most damaging forms of that, and or just hitting your opponent's leader for a bunch of damage, because that's going to be how you reduce his health. And he does have 1 shield, making him a little harder to hit, but that's effectively how you will eventually, slowly but surely, reduce their health down from 10 to 0. That's the core gameplay loop. The core gameplay loop is you're going to assign and move around units. You're going to earn various things from coins to insight. You're going to use those to go ahead and draft cards, being mindful of the silver cost as well as the insight requirements. You're also going to have these cards over here. You're going to have a bunch of these over here in play. You have 2 copies of each of a few cards, and these are abilities you can go ahead and play. So Smite, deal 2 damage to a target unit. We have Courage, give a target unit +1 attack and +2 defense until end of turn. We have Block, target 3 units. If you have 6 insight, target only 2 units instead. Sacrifice the units and destroy a target knowledge card. Those are all very devastating things that are going to mess with your opponent, and the knowledge cards are also devastating because you're going to start the game with 1 over here, but we have these in play, and these are just the current ones we have in this setup over here. We have Ards, gain 2 extra money doing your resource face. If you can generate that 5 insight and play this card, you're just going to have extra insight coming your way. We have Nana's Anguish. Each time an enemy unit dies, deal 1 damage to your opponent's leader, which is going to help hurt your opponents even when you're not attacking the leader. We have Battle Knife. Your leader has +2 attack. When your leader kills a unit, deal 1 damage to your opponent's leader. These are all going to be things that stay in play on an ongoing basis, but you have to make sure to generate that insight and be aware of the fact that if you pay 5 insight for something going down to 1, suddenly a bunch of these cards where you have to only have insight are going to be locked away from you as well. But these cards are going to completely change up the game every single time, and the knowledge cards, and this goes where we go to the variability of the game, because if I show you this giant box over here, this is all the stuff we have for the game. We have all of these unit cards over here. That's 32 different units, of which you'll have 12 per game. We have knowledge cards. We have 22 knowledge cards. We'll have up to 5 of those per game. We have 13 prophecy cards, of 14 prophecy cards, of which you'll only have 3 or 4 per game or not. And so you have a ton of variability to the experience as far as different ways to dive into it. That's basically how you play Feud. 2 players going back and forth, trying to manage units, trying to outdraft each other based on the available market, and trying to take your opponent down before they take you down to 0 in this 2-player head-to-head experience. Which brings me to my review, starting off with ease of play. Rulebook is incredibly accessible in this one. This is the rulebook for the game, okay? We got a handful of pages. Here's our setup. When you go to the actual rules, we got page 6, page 7, 8, 9, and that's it. That's everything else. We have a few things about timing, priorities, other stuff, but it's basically 4 pages of rules. It's very accessible, very easy to set up and table and all that. Once you get your first few turns in, the game makes sense. Once you get your first game in, the strategy makes sense. It's an easy game to play, knocks out in generally around the 30 to 45 minute range. It can drag a bit depending on the combination, depending on the players, how offensive they're being. If you have 2 players who are both trying to just build stuff up and focus on that over attacking each other, it can drag a little. You also can have a game in 20 minutes if someone's not playing strategically enough and you're able to just power through and take them out, but generally in the 30 to 45 minute range for a game. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not, although I will say table space in this one. Over here you can see one mat, another mat, and the other mat kind of there. It's not the biggest as far as table space, but the mats are decently large to make sure you can see everything at all times. Not overwhelmingly so, but more so than I would expect for a 2-player head-to-head experience. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, First of all, this game just has a degree of almost worker placement, but with everything else in mind. You're building out units in this game. You're building out various members of your village. And yes, you will use some of those for combat and for defense and for attacking. But in the meantime, maybe they are chopping down some wood. Maybe they are gathering some insight or helping you in the homestead. They're doing different things, and you have to build and buy based on trying to both drive the game strategy while also responding to your opponent. When you see your opponent draft certain cards, you will want to draft certain cards in response. You will want to be able to respond and engage and figure out what you need to do to take them out. Alternatively, maybe you dip into your prophecy cards or your knowledge cards because maybe those things have the tools that can help you instead. And so there's a constant push of managing your resources, of buying the right units you need, of trying to get everything you need in play. And there's a slow reaction time in the game as things adjust. A reaction time to being a bit more offensive as you slowly creep towards a battlefield, being a bit more defensive as you line up units on the wall, being able to double up, having your leader be both in the wall and in the homestead, so a little less resources, but being able to sit there, and they also get to block up to 2 units, and your leaders get more powerful for each unit of yours destroyed. They actually are not that offensive at first, they're more defensive. But as your opponents, as your team, as your people start dying, your leader becomes a little bit more vengeful, getting stronger and stronger as they play. And you're trying to balance all of this, balancing offense and defense and resource management. It's very much a rock, paper, scissors of gaming. You know, to win, you need to be offensive. You need to attack. To deal with that, you need to be defensive. And to respond to that, you need to deal with your economy. And to respond to that, you're offensive. It's a rock, paper, scissors of trying to figure out what to prioritize at any given point. And then the sheer variability of the amount of cards and the pools of things you're going to build. This is mostly over here a starting setup recommendation, but you can draft randomly. They have drafting cards, so you can randomize it up and try to figure out what combination of cards, of prophecies, of knowledge are going to result in a fun gameplay. But there's an absolute ton of just things in play in a very simple system, but one that gives you a lot of variability as far as what's going to drive how you engage with it. Again, even these prophecy cards over here, getting 2 extra income doing a phase over here is incredibly game breaking. But then again, so is your leader having +2 attack, and when your leader kills a unit, deal 1 damage to your opponent's leader. There's so many small things that are going to be in play that shift up your strategy or shift up the way you are trying to engage with the game system to ultimately drive home victory. As far as what I don't like in the game, the biggest thing I have is unfortunate, but it is a factor, which is I'm not pulled in by the visual aesthetic of the game. Neither like the box artwork's fine, but the matte artwork is fine. The character cards I find to be just so lo-fi in their presentation that I want more for this game. I like this game. I enjoy it. We'll talk more about it in final thoughts. But for me, I wish this game had a bit more to it in terms of the presentation of it. I very much am somebody who plays with my eyes to a degree. That sounds weird. I play games with my eyes. If there's a well-produced, well-visually inclined game, I very often want to play it, even if the strategy isn't as much there, or even if the mechanics aren't as solid. And the reverse is true as well. There are many games that I sadly just have not chosen to table enough because the visual presentation didn't pull me in enough. I like Feud a lot, and I wish it was... I think the art does a good job for being very lo-fi in its presentation, but I want every card to stick out at me. I want there to be more pop to it, more color, more everything to it. I think this game is very, very good, and I just wish it had more in that department. The art just doesn't pull me in, unfortunately. I'll also say that the game can have a bit of a repetitive start to the game, as very often you're going to go into a cycle of drafting the early cost cards, which are almost always like very similar. There's less room to distinguish a 1 cost card, and so you're going to be drafting very similar cheap cards, trying to put them into your economy, try to get them up and running. I'd say that in a game that generally lasts 30 to 45 minutes, the first 10 minutes or so feels a bit rote and repetitive, which makes sense. It's not a big deal, but it's a small thing as you play multiple games. I'm kind of in it for the mid to late game, and the early game still has to be gone through ultimately to get there, even though it's a little bit more samey game to game. There's a few pathways. Again, the insight, aggression, or economy are usually the pathways you're going to be focusing on early on. But past those 3 basic strategies, your first 10 minutes of play won't shift up a ton. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all, you can sometimes have things snowball just negatively in this game. You could have times where someone gets too much of a lead in some sense, whether they built up their economy correctly, whether they escalate on the battlefield. It is very possible for a player to get a little too strong too quickly, for you to not have responded appropriately, and for you to just get snowballed and stomped on. They buy the right prophecy card that helps them do something you didn't predict or plan around it, and your defenses are in shambles, and you're just playing catch up, and the game, those will be the shorter games, and it's not always the most fun. I'll also say that this game has a very high degree of perfect information in play, which can be one of those things that limits the accessibility of the game, in the sense that you have a perfect market of cards. You know what's in these cards over here. You're pulling them out and buying those. You have perfect information at every turn, except for what your opponent's buying at times, but you have to predict around that. But for the most part, there's the perfect information about the possible strategies, and the only gap is trying to read your opponent what they might have purchased in terms of the prophecy or knowledge cards, and that can produce a high skill ceiling. That can result in a player who knows the game well just being able to dominate someone who doesn't know the game as well, and so you have to be mindful of that skill gap and have players who will help coach others into the system, as opposed to taking advantage of the fact that I've played it 5 times and you're just diving into your very first game. As far as final thoughts on Feud, I really like the actual gameplay of this one. It's one of those things, I feel shallow for saying it, but this is a game that I really like the gameplay. I know that I've enjoyed my time with it. I know I've had fun with the back and forth. It is fun to build up your economy. It's a game that I wasn't expecting to be that impressed by, and then when I sat down and actually tabled it, I really enjoyed the gameplay aspects of it. I think it's very well done. I think the wide pool of characters and abilities really gives you a very interesting things to consider as you play this. This is one of those games that's just, from a pure gameplay stance, it really pulls me in. But I do find that it does fall into a zone that I've had other games in the past, a zone in which I have to remind myself that I like you, and when I sit down and play you, I enjoy it. When I sit down and play it, I have fun, and I'm like, I should play this again. But then if, time goes by, and, if a month goes by, and suddenly I'm looking at it again, I'm like, I don't know if I want to pull it out and play, and that does often come down to the visual presentation, which I think in Feud, again, I think it's fine. I just wish there were more. I wish it was better done in that department. Better graphic design, better presentation, better art, all those things I think are fine the way it is. They really could make a difference, though, in terms of my desire to pull this off the shelf, which has me torn on rating. For me, I'm going to give this one a 3.5 out of 5. I think mechanically it's a 4. I really do. I think mechanically it's a 4 for me, but I have to judge a game by the whole package, and I'm not as inclined. I'm not ready to get rid of this one just yet. I'm not ready to get rid of it. I've enjoyed my time with it, and I still want to continue playing it. I want there to be I've said enough. You know where I am in this one. I really like the game. I think that mechanically it's really solid. It's a very impressive 2-player head-to-head experience. I just want a drop more from the visual presentation aspect of things. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, if you're looking for another 2-player experience that is incredibly tight and incredibly fun to play, I highly recommend Radlands, a very big experience in a very small box. And if you're looking for a game that does give me the same vibe as Feud, but in a very different engine, Dominion, the classic deck builder Dominion, very much has a similar vibe as far as the fixed markets, trying to figure out how to build your engine around those fixed markets and trying to outpace your opponents, but in a deck building buy yourself points kind of format instead of a take down your opponent's leader kind of format. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.